For my master's Capstone 2 project, I wanted to focus on what I like to call the American myth, a concept of what it is to be American and the standards that are placed on different gender roles and age groups in the United States in the visual arts. Specifically, how do American artists criticize this idealized and romanticized concept of America and Americans? For this paper, the myth specifically is what I called the post-war myth, specifically referring to the post-war era, 1950s, early 1960s in the United States. The post-war American myth is just that. It's a myth. It has been used to sell Americans objects and an idea what Americanness is. It's also been used to overall package the concept of Americanness abroad to international audiences during the Cold War era. This myth has been used to criticize American culture and has been used as a standard in which Americans are judged against. The 1950s in the United States brings a very specific image to the minds of not only Americans today, but to people around the world, and it is of the white, all-American, middle-class suburban family. The 1950s suburban, middle-class, white family is a creation from advertisement and from the media. This idea of the family unit in America at the time was specifically created to sell products to Americans and to connect a certain wholesome ideal lifestyle with products such as Coca-Cola or Tide detergent. The intended audience and consumers for these products were white middle-class Americans who were moving into the suburbs. Famously, Make America Great Again, first used by Reagan, who would have been familiar with the post-war American myth, being that he was a working actor in Hollywood at the time of the myth being perpetuated in Hollywood and through television, but also most recently through Donald Trump and his administration. Print advertisement and television, both being visual, were very effective tools in order to tie consumer objects to this post-war American myth through the icons of the myth, which would be this all-American white suburban nuclear family. This model of this all-American family has a mother figure, a father figure, and a younger son, younger sister type figure. We see this replicated in advertisement, we see it replicated in commercials, we see it in very famous television sitcoms of the 1950s. This model, this family model, is essential to the post-war myth because it gives Americans a specific icon to relate to. Women were to relate to the mother figure. The men and the husbands were to relate to the father figure. The children would relate with the younger brother or the younger sister figure in this post-war myth. These icons were also used in advertisement. If you wanted to achieve the idyllic lifestyle and have the ideal family unit, like these family models on television or in the advertisement, well, you needed to buy what they bought. You needed to eat what they ate. You needed to dress how they dress. And therefore, through buying, through consumer culture, you too can achieve this ideal, perfect American lifestyle. But it's all a myth, and that's really important. It's all meant to sell objects. It's meant to sell an idea, but it never was real. The post-war American myth has been used by certain political parties to criticize contemporary society. We've also seen television and film acknowledge the role that they have played in the past in spreading the post-war American myth and the effect that it has had on American culture, and almost putting these exceptionally high, unachievable expectations upon an American public. Post-war American myth was a creation of media and advertising. We have seen how political parties have used this myth to criticize contemporary society. We have seen how these exact mediums that were first used to disseminate the post-war myth have responded and reacted to the effects that the myth has had on American culture. But how have American artists responded to the myth? For this paper, I selected the works of 3 American artists: Barbara Kruger, Andy Warhol, and Norman Rockwell. Each artist either appropriates or directly uses techniques from print media and print advertisement in their work. Each artist uses the techniques of print media and print advertising to criticize the post-war American myth and its effects on American society, or that's what I argue in this paper. Each in their own individual manner, whether it's Barbara Kruger, who is specifically focusing on and criticizing the myth's effects on American women, or Andy Warhol as a society at large. Each artist, I argue, in their own way, criticizes the myth itself by using the same techniques that were used originally to spread the myth and ingrain it into American culture. Miss Barbara Kruger is best known for her large-scale photo montages, which use found images and are juxtaposed with short text. Kruger's photo montages mimic that of print advertisement. They use specific out-of-context images and short lines, which also mimic what are the slogans or taglines for consumer objects. Kruger's works, while appropriating print advertisement, aren't selling an idea or an object. Instead, Kruger uses the techniques of print advertisement to confront consumerism and its effects on American culture, specifically on women. This is clear in Barbara Kruger's work, Your Body is a Battleground, from 1989. To analyze Your Body is a Battleground as a work by Barbara Kruger, directly criticizing this idealized role of the American woman, the American housewife icon associated with the post-war myth. It was important to break down the work and compare it to images, depictions of women from the 1950s in print media and television. Untitled Your Body is a Battleground, Kruger chooses to crop the found image to only exhibit a tight image of the woman's face. There are no contextual clues other than the face of the woman. Using the face, using the style of the makeup and the hair, and comparing it to women that appeared in advertisement in the 1950s, there is a clear similarity between the styles of makeup that are from the same era, which is how I came to the conclusion that Kruger was specifically citing the icon of the American housewife that is associated with the post-war myth, and associating that idea, that icon, that enlarged icon that she chose with the text, Your Body is a Battleground, the ambiguous text in which your is unclear and up for the viewer to decide. While Kruger specifically chooses an image of a woman that is associated with the overall idea of femininity and the icon of the American woman of the post-war myth, she also is directly referring to a specific advertisement, or I argue that she is specifically citing a specific advertisement and a technique in advertisement. Specifically, I refer to the Dove soap advertisement from the 1950s, late 1950s, early 1960s, in which Dove runs a print advertisement that divides a woman's face, a model's face, into two. to try to have the woman in the ad compare how Dove soap leaves her skin and what that side of the face that uses Dove skin feels like, and compared to the competitor soap. The point of the advertisement being that Dove soap leaves a woman's face soft and supple and smooth, all ideas that are associated with femininity, and especially the femininity of the 1950s and the type of femininity and image that American women were expected to conform to. Kruger appropriates the Dove advertisement, and instead of a smiling model washing her face with Dove soap, we see a woman with a stern, serious look on her face, and there is no explanation of why her face is divided in two. The woman in Untitled Your Body is a Battleground, while in the Dove soap advertisements, it is clear that there is a test between Dove soap and a competitor soap brands happening, a comparison of femininity associated with Dove and what your skin will be left if you use a competitor's brand on your face. Kruger instead removes all association with the test of the consumer brand, and instead she just divides the woman's face in half out of context, literally making the woman's face, the icon's face, a battleground where there are two different sides. Comparing it to that same methodology in the Dove advertisement, the purpose in the ad for Dove is to signify that one side of the face is good and feminine and the other side of the face is not. So for Kruger, she's here now making the woman's face the literal battleground, and there are two conflicting sides, two oppositions fighting against each other, which stands for a larger idea of what this hyper feminine 1950s housewife icon, has done and how it has actually worked and to oppress and oppose women. Andy Warhol, who is best known for his pop art, was a fashion illustrator before he formally chose to become an artist in the early 1960s. In the early 1960s, he started making large-scale canvases that were reproductions of advertisements and of illustrations of mass-produced commercial goods. Warhol's art was an observation of the homogenization of American society by the rising consumer culture at the hands of the post-war American myth. Warhol, in his appropriation of print advertisement of the time, comments on consumer culture and the effects that consumer culture had on Americans. The homogenization of American culture, the destruction of the individual, the pressure to conform to the American icons of the post-war American myth, the standards in which Americans and society at large were being held against. Like Andy Warhol, who was a fashion illustrator and then quit to become an artist, Norman Rockwell always considered himself to be an illustrator, and he worked for large publications for the majority of his career. Norman Rockwell's illustrations played a huge part in the dissemination of the post-war myth, but these are images that he was commissioned to make, and the final say of what the images were meant to look like for the majority of his career, especially at the Saturday Evening Post, were dictated by the magazine editors. While Rockwell was not able, while working for the Saturday Evening Post, to choose the subject matter or to have final say on what his illustrations were going to look like, I argue that he still injected some of his personal criticisms of this world, this post-war American myth, the overly idealistic, overly moral, white, working class, middle class, suburban American idyllic image. Rockwell's illustrations for the Saturday Evening Post are advertisements. They are advertisements for this post-war myth, for the concept and the idea of America than which the Saturday Evening Post editors sells to its readers. They're also modeled after Dutch genre scenes. These American genre scenes, like the Dutch genre scenes, are deeply psychological. Rockwell's critiques lie in the details of his illustrations. While Kruger and Warhol appropriate or base their works directly off existing print advertisement to criticize the culture around the advertisement, the American myth represented in the advertisement, Rockwell directly criticizes the myth. He doesn't need to appropriate an ad. He is well aware that he is a part of the industry that is disseminating this highly constructed, edited fantasy to the American public. He exposes that, and I argue that he criticizes that overly sweet, unattainable world in his scenes by the almost eerie sweetness and innocence that is unsettling to the viewer. It unsettles the viewer in either their reaction of finding his work unsettling and cheesy, a clear rejection of what reality is, or in its ability to bring out a sense of longingness and nostalgia for a world that never existed. Therefore, whichever reaction from the viewer, Rockwell's genre scenes are invoking a reaction and are having the viewer acknowledge the fantasy of the myth, the unattainable standards, and the world that will never be. Artists, through their use of print media and the techniques of print media and print advertisement, creates works that confront the post-war American myth head-on by using the same imagery and icons of the myth, but also have the viewer confront the fallacy of the myth by exposing the flaws of the myth and having the viewer confront the truths of their reality by accepting the ridiculousness of the advertisement taken out of context in Warhol, or having a reflection of the cultural pressures on women through Barbara Kruger, or in Rockwell comparing reality to the depiction of the America that Rockwell and the Saturday Evening Post are trying to sell to the public. The viewer is forced to recognize reality and to also accept the fallacy of the myth and the negative effects it has on American culture.